The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is arriving in London today. It's an official visit. Mohammed bin Salman is getting the full red carpet treatment. He's having lunch with the Queen, dinner with Prince Charles, like him, the heir to the throne, a trip to Chequers to see the Prime Minister. Now, he is an interesting figure. He's only 32. He's painted himself as a modernising reformer. He has been designated as heir to the throne, which doesn't often happen, hasn't happened for a generation in Saudi Arabia. But of course, his critics aren't convinced. Our security correspondent, Frank Garner, can tell us more. Frank, good to see you. Let me just ask you this, because he seems to be a quixotic character. He's known as something of a domestic reformer, but the number of beheadings since he was named heir apparent have doubled in Saudi Arabia. He's known to be a modernizer, but he's also involved in an aggressive and horrendous war in the Yemen. Tell us more about him.
Sure, let me try and peer through the smoke. I have actually met him. I met him 4 years ago, but when he was nobody. Nobody'd even heard of him. So he's risen to power very, very quickly. He is a modernizer, he is a reformer, but let's not be starry-eyed about him. He is no Democrat. Saudi Arabia still has a very poor human rights record, and as you rightly say, it's involved in a damaging war in Yemen. He has a vision for Saudi Arabia. Diplomats have said this is the guy that is needed to shake up the sclerotic Saudi system, because it couldn't go on the way it was. Oil prices are declining in real terms. The youth population is bulging. 70% of Saudis are under the age of 30, and a lot of them haven't got jobs. And of course, without democracy, without political representation, sooner or later there was going to be something had to give. So what he's doing is he's saying, right, let's empower women. It's absurd that in 2018, half the adult population aren't allowed to drive. So that's going to happen from June. He's reintroducing cinemas. He's allowing women to run their own businesses, to travel abroad, things that the hardline extremist clerics previously hadn't allowed them to do. So he's pushing back the power of the clerics. In that sense, he's a modernizer. But he is no Democrat. He's locked up over 200 people and shaken them down for their assets, accusing them of corruption. He himself, and I'm not suggesting he's corrupt, but he himself has a £450 million yacht that he bought a couple of years ago, and debatably the most expensive property in the world, a large chateau in France. People don't seem to mind that. He's very popular with young Saudis. Now, when it comes to Yemen, he, as defense minister, brought Saudi Arabia into a war that was already underway. The Saudis didn't start this war, the Houthi rebels did in September 2014. But 6 months later, he led an air campaign thinking he could bomb the Houthis back to the negotiating table and they would sue for peace. That hasn't happened. They've held on, and Yemen has suffered as a result.
Should the British be right in wanting to get close to him? His domestic reform programme, we don't know where that will lead, whether it will be a success. He's bogged down in the Yemen, a war very much with his name now stamped on it. The Saudis have lost massive influence in the Lebanon. They've lost out to the Iranian-backed forces in Syria, and they've not even been able to cow little Qatar. So is he, is he going to succeed? Is he someone that you want to be alongside?
Well, I think you have to ask, what is the alternative? I'm not going to sort of put my hand up and say yes or no, we should be friends. There is no disputing, and I don't think even his opponents would dispute that Saudi Arabia as a country is enormously important. It's the birthplace of Islam. It's home to the two holiest shrines in Islam, Mecca and Medina. It is, a site of pilgrimage for millions every year. It's the world's biggest oil producer. But its policies definitely deserve to come under the microscope. Now, if Britain were to cut ties and say, well, actually, we no longer want to be friends with Saudi Arabia, we would lose what little influence we do have over them. And there is some influence. So when it comes to Yemen, for example, RAF officers and others have been restraining the Saudis, have been lecturing them to not hit civilian targets. Now, I can just hear people scoffing at that, as I would if somebody said it to me, because they've caused enormous damage in that country. But it would be even worse. The Saudis feel that they are surrounded by an advancing, aggressive Iranian expansionism. After 2003, Iran essentially expanded its militias into Iraq, into Syria, into Lebanon, and now they're feeling that they're surrounded from Yemen as well. So they're trying to push back.
All right. Frank, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for being on the Daily Politics today. Mel Stride, 10,000 killed in the Yemen so far, 500,000 suffering from cholera, 20 million in need of humanitarian assistance. Are you happy that all this is happening with the force of British arms?
Well, the situation in the Yemen is clearly very tragic indeed, and we have a situation that we have to deal with. So what we are is one of the largest humanitarian donors to those in the area. We're working using our influence on the inside to make sure that we open up those humanitarian routes, those commercial routes in the ports that have been blockaded.
But we haven't managed that.
And so on. Well, we have made some progress, and there's far more progress that needs to be done. But the third and most important point in many ways is that we use our influence to move towards a peace process, to reopening dialogue and to getting a political
So why
solution to the
in 18
situation.
months we haven't even managed to draft resolution for a ceasefire at the UN?
Well, we keep pushing. I mean, if
But we haven't, because we've not managed to draft the resolution.
If the alternative, Andrew, is just to walk away and say we're not going to talk to them.
No, the
Saudis,
alternative
then
I'm suggesting
that
is
wouldn't
at
be
the
very
very
helpful,
least
so.
you would draft a resolution for the UN Security Council, which may help to concentrate minds. But we haven't managed to do that.
As you know, UN Security Council resolutions go through on a unanimous basis, and we are working with the UN, and we are working with the Saudis.
But 18 months and we haven't even had that.
We are using our influence. But the whole crux of this discussion is about whether we should engage with Saudi Arabia or whether we should just basically say we're going to cut ties with you. Right. And I think, as Frank was suggesting in that clip, I think you would then lose influence were you to do that. So it is far better to engage and work and push for progress than to step aside and say,
but before we move on that, can you give me one example of where there has been progress then?
Well, there is, in the case of Yemen,
yes,
it's getting humanitarian supplies through. There have been periods of
but there's
the past
still massive blockades going on. There is still bombing of civilians going on.
Far from satisfactory.
It's the biggest, according to some NGOs, the biggest humanitarian crisis currently on the globe. And my goodness, there are plenty of candidates for that.
It is far, far from satisfactory. But the critical question here, as I say, is do you engage? And don't make the imperfect the enemy of the good. That is what I would say. We're better to engage and get change that way than stepping aside and washing our hands.
Debbie, I'm sorry. Debbie Abrahams.
I'm only Deborah when I'm naughty. Yeah.
Very well. Well, I'll stick with Debbie for the moment, but I may change. Your Shadow Foreign Secretary said that, quote, Labour would stop the war in Yemen. How?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't disagree with what Mel has said about maintaining that engagement, but it's the difference between engaging and rolling out a red carpet. It is absolutely shocking.
No, but how would you stop the war in Yemen?
Well, we need to have that engagement, but not under these sort of terms, when we have, as I say, a royal state visit to the country. So, yes, of course, engage with them to ensure that we
But how would you stop the war?
I'm just saying that. So you make sure that you are engaging with them, but not on these terms.
But you would stop any arms sales.
We have said that we need to make sure that we have proper regulations around.
Well, I think your policy is to send no more arms. I mean, why would the Crown Prince listen to you at all? They see your leader as sympathetic to Iran. He's appeared on Press TV in the past. Why would the Saudis give you the time of day?
Because we would be the government of the time.
But the government that had an arms blockade and was seen more sympathetic to Iran than to Saudi Arabia. Why would they listen to you?
The most important thing, Andrew, is you don't have trade at any cost. So we need to make sure that the trade deals that we do have fulfil some sort of principles. My key issue with today, with the state visit, is it's totally inappropriate. What Saudi Arabia have been doing in terms of disproportionate and
so you wouldn't have the state, you wouldn't have them here at all?
We wouldn't have the state visit, but we would. Mel made an important point about
trade,
engaging.
Though, is it? It's also about our
security.
security.
Isn't it?
All right.
We know that we had a security relationship with them. There would have been an attack at the...
I'm afraid we have to
had an attack in the 2012
We're trying to cram a lot in here this
Olympics.
morning.
If we had...
Sir, excuse me, we have to move on.